The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. Well, last week the CBC did a report on the Freemen movement called Finding the Freemen, because I guess they're hiding. And this was basically like a hit piece on the Freemen. And I know this because I actually know some of the people in the video, and I feel that they were really misrepresented. This was like fear-mongering about the Freemen. First of all, they opened the report with some very scary music, a man saying all their rules and laws have no power over us, and then show somebody shooting a gun. So the message right there is the Freemen are dangerous. And then to really freak you out, they tell you that this fringe group's numbers are rising, and that so may its potential for violence. Now, I actually know some Freemen, and I can tell you that they're, the ones that I know, that they're very peaceful people. This has nothing to do with being radical, extremist, violent. They just basically object to the system that we have, which puts people under a lot of acts and statutes which limit their freedom and pick their pockets. So the Freemen, however, intend always to act lawfully under common law, which means to not cause harm, loss, or injury. Next, they show you some footage of Freemen, or supposedly Freemen, because I know one of them, and he's not actually a Freeman, interacting with police on the road, where the cop stops them for a traffic stop, and they say here, fake license plates. Then they refuse to show a driver's license, and basically they don't want to pay their tickets. Now here's the thing, the licenses are not fake, they're just homemade. The reason they can have this is because the car is not registered. Because you actually don't need to have the vehicle registered or have a license if you are solely using it to travel as opposed to driving. Driving meaning using the vehicle for commercial purposes. So in Canada, we have a common law right to travel, which includes by motorized conveyance. So you don't need to have a license or have your vehicle registered in order to use it. These people being stopped are actually acting lawfully, and in fact they have signed an affidavit saying that they will adhere to the rules of the road and not engage in any kind of reckless behavior or cause harm, loss, or injury. Then they say here that these Canadians in these traffic stop situations are seemingly talking nonsense. They're actually not talking nonsense. What they're using is basically legal verbiage, which is perfectly lawful and legitimate, and actually very true. It's just that they know their rights and they know the law. So when the cop comes up to him and says, I need to see your license, they understand that to mean he needs to see it, but that doesn't mean I have to give it, because that is in fact the case. When they're talking about things like that the cop is trying to create joinder, what they're referring to is that the traffic stop is actually a financial transaction, that the cop needs to see your government-issued ID, which identifies you as what we call the straw man, the corporate fiction, over which the police have jurisdiction with acts and statutes. They don't have that jurisdiction over the human being with a soul. They have it over the corporate fiction. If you don't identify yourself as that corporate fiction or employee of the Corporation of Canada, they have no jurisdiction over you, and they cannot create joinder with you and issue you a ticket. When you were born and your parents registered you and you were issued a birth certificate, with that birth certificate was created your straw man or corporate fiction, and it's only over this corporate fictional representation of you, the human being with the soul, that the government actually has any authority with all their acts and statutes. And that's why in these situations the cops then leave the person, because they recognize that they have no jurisdiction over them. The person's not actually doing anything wrong. They have not breached the peace. It's just that the cop cannot enter into a financial transaction with them because the person that they stopped hasn't put themselves under their jurisdiction. They have not given them the authority to issue that transaction. Of course, none of this applies if a Freeman has actually caused harm, loss, or injury, which is under common law jurisdiction unlawful, and he would, be held responsible the same way anyone else would. All this Freeman stuff really basically just applies to acts and statutes, financial transactions. Then they show you what they call a Freeman acting up in court. The Freeman actually is just standing. There are a lot of things that happen in court whereby you inadvertently give the court jurisdiction over you. So if the judge orders you to sit down and you obey that order, same as if the cop says go stand over there, anything that they order you to do that you obey, you have agreed that they have authority over you. So if the judge says to him to sit down, he would probably have to conditionally accept to sit down to avoid giving the judge that authority, or he could, I don't know, do something else. But that's all that he's doing. And they say that the purpose of the Freeman movement is so that people can avoid paying taxes and utility bills, and I think they said also traffic tickets. Oh, mortgages. Well, for the income taxes, that's very simple. When you first file your taxes, the very first time you file them, you have entered into contract through the Income Tax Act to then file them every year. If you've never filed them, well, you're not in contract. So they really can't do anything. As for not paying mortgages or utility bills, well, this is something called accepted for value, where you use the actual bill as a remittance and you send it back saying accepted for value, returned for value, exempt from levy. I'm not sure if this actually works, but some people say that they have been able to do this. And they're not freeloading. We have a lot of natural resources. The country of Canada has a certain amount of wealth, and the people are also part of that wealth, and as Canadians we should also share in that wealth. So what we have now is like a kind of corporate system. But you know, technically, apparently if you use accepted for value, you can pay your utility bills with it, because you're like a shareholder of the Corporation of Canada as opposed to an employee of it. We should all be shareholders. It's just that when we're registered at birth, our shares are like in trust with, I think, the Minister of Finance. I'm not totally clear about this. Our shares in the corporation are in trust, and so then we're kind of like children of the state. The Freemen talk about reversing the trust, but I don't actually know anyone who has done that. But some of them do use accepted for value, and it's lawful. But they're making it out to sound like these people are freeloaders, and like the Freeman movement is a big scam, and that Rob Menard is some kind of cult figure guru and he's scamming people. And they give as example this one guy who I guess read something about the Freeman movement and then decided to try to put a notice on an abandoned house in order to take possession of that house. He did that, he moved into the house, and I don't know, something went wrong. He ended up getting arrested, and it was very humiliating for him. Now, Rob Menard would say that this man had not done his due diligence. I'm pretty sure that's what he would say. Whatever this guy did, at some point he did something wrong, and that's why he got in trouble. And he can't blame Rob Menard for that, because Rob Menard is not telling anybody what to do. He's just offering information on how this system works, and then you have to figure out what you're going to do with that information. And Rob Menard is a free man. This has worked for him, which is proof that it does work. But it's not like he's a cult leader. Actually, he shies away from being called a guru or anything like that. Rob Menard is just a really brilliant guy with a very thorough understanding of the law, and he just shares that information. And if somebody misuses it, doesn't do their due diligence, as Rob would say, well, that's their fault. The basic thing about freemen is that they're responsible for themselves. So what kind of a freeman would do something, screw up, and then blame somebody else for it? Then they horrify you with the story of a man, supposedly a freeman, who gets stopped at a traffic stop, pulls out a pile of documents, as freemen do, and then his son gets out of the passenger seat and shoots the cop with an AK-47. And so they're trying to make it out like, well, the freemen are dangerous. Because somebody shot, well, who knows if this guy was even a freeman, first of all, or he's just somebody who did not want to use a driver's license, because it's not the same thing. And second, you know, all kinds of people commit crimes. So, you know, I mean, if a Christian, because there have been Christians who have murdered or who've done all kinds of things. So if a Christian commits a murder, does that mean that all Christians are dangerous? And then they have this woman, J.J. McNabb, come on, who say that now the freemen are, you know, refusing to have driver's licenses or pay property taxes, but the next step will be acts of violence. Well, I really don't see the connection. I mean, this is just complete nonsense. The freemen are just peaceable and intelligent people who know their rights and know the law so that those enforcing the law cannot take advantage of them. And this has nothing to do with acts of violence. And then they give the example of Timothy McVeigh, who supposedly was a sovereign, but that's a very bad example because the Oklahoma City bombing was a false flag. So what are they saying here? And then the other example that they give is Joe Stack, who flew his plane into the IRS building, which is not a very good example either, because Joe Stack, from what I understand, was not actually a free man, but he had been involved in something about trying to learn to become a creditor or to be like a non-profit foundation, and that didn't work out for him, and he was harassed by the IRS for decades, and then eventually got this kind of revenge. But that has really nothing to do with the freeman. That has nothing to do with deregistering yourself, or not registering your children, or not registering your vehicle. And then they show you some shots of freemen shooting guns or talking about guns as if, you know, the freemen are really violent. They've got all kinds of guns and they're just going to use them because they're crazy. Just because you're against registering your gun doesn't mean you're some kind of crazy terrorist who's going to go on a murderous rampage. And then, to their credit, Adrienne Arsenault wraps it up by saying that she's talked to freemen and they're basically peaceful, and there's not really a reason to think that they could turn violent, and that a lot of cops would even agree with this, but that they just want to know more about the freemen movement. Overall, though, it comes across as a hit piece, and I'm kind of hoping that the public will see through this fear-mongering. And what's amazing is that they say there's 30,000 freemen in Canada. That's a lot. I mean, we only have, 30 million here, so that's quite a lot of freemen. So this thing's really catching on. What's catching on in general is that people are starting to be more informed, and they're starting to know their rights, whether it's that you don't actually have to vaccinate your kid or whatever it is, or whether it's how to deal with your landlord. People are much more informed now than they were, before the internet came along. And for some people, this has translated into an interest to have a deep understanding of the law, so that they can really know how to avoid being subjected to random corporate tyranny, because in fact it's all by consent, and so they're just learning, they're understanding the process of how people consent and refusing to give their consent, but it's all perfectly lawful. So I just wanted to give you my perspective on this, since I actually know some free men, and thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.